أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الرحمن علم القرآن خلق الإنسان علمه البيان الشمس والقمر بحسبان والنجم والشجر يسجدان والسماء رفعها ووضع الميزان ألا تطغوا في الميزان وأقيموا الوزن بالقسط ولا تخسروا الميزان والأرض وضعها للأنام فيها فاكهة والنخل ذات الأكمام والحب ذو العصف والريحان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان خلق الإنسان من صلصال كالفخار وخلق الجان من مارج من نار فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان رب المشرقين ورب المغربين فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان مرج البحرين يلتقيان بينهما برزخ لا يبغيان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان يخرج منهما اللؤلؤ والمرجان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان صدق الله العلي العظيم وصدق رسوله الكريم صلى الله على محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين.
السلام علیکم ورحمۃ اللہ وبرکاتہ. تمام مومنین و مومنات کو رادت امام علی رضا بہت بہت مبارک ہو. قادر مطلق سے یہی دعا ہے اس بابرکت دن کے حوالے سے کہ اللہ تعالیٰ ہم سب کو اپنے زمان میں رکھے اور ہم سب کو اس کرونا کی وبا سے دور رکھے اور جو بیمار ہیں جو علیل ہیں ان کو شفا دے. آمین. صلوات پڑھتے ہیں بر محمد وآل محمد. اللہم صلی اللہ اللہم صلی اللہ. مولا 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 مولا. یہ آ رہی ہے مسلسل صدا امام رضا، یہ آ رہی ہے مسلسل صدا امام رضا. اذان دل ہے اذان دل ہے امام رضا امام رضا. یہ آ رہی ہے مسلسل صدا امام رضا، یہ آ رہی ہے مسلسل صدا امام رضا. ہے عکس زینب کلثوم آپ کی خواہر، ہے سے زینب کلثوم آپ کی خواہ ہے، حسن حسین کا ہے امام رضا، یہ آ رہی ہے مسلسل صدا امام رضا۔ مولا 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 مولا، مریض عشق کو راسا گئی خدا کی قسم، مریض عشق کو راسا گئی خدا کی قسم، تمہارے شہر کی آب و ہوا خود آب و ہوا امام رضا، یہ آ رہی ہے مسلسل صدا امام رضا، یہ آ رہی ہے مسلسل صدا امام رضا، تمہارے روزے کی جالی کو چومنے کے بعد، تمہارے روزے کی جالی کو چومنے کے بعد، ہوا بھی ہونے لگی کہ میاں امام رضا، یہ آ رہی ہے مسلسل صدا امام رضا، یہ آ رہی ہے مسلسل صدا امام رضا، میری لہد میں بس ایک نور ہے پکارا مجھے، میری لہد میں بس ایک نور نے پکارا مجھے، جو پوچھا میں نے تو ہونے لگا امام رضا، یہ آ رہی ہے مسلسل صدا امام رضا، یہ آ رہی ہے مسلسل صدا امام رضا، اسے بہشت میں جانے کی آرزو کیوں ہو، اسے بہشت میں جانے کی آرزو کیوں ہو، جس سے نصیب ہو تیری رضا امام رضا، یہ آ رہی ہے مسلسل صدا امام رضا، یہ آ رہی ہے مسلسل صدا امام رضا، تیرے کرم کی ہر ایک انسان کو ضرورت ہے، تیرے کرم کی ہر ایک انسان کو ضرورت ہے، جہاں سے ختم ہو بس یہ وبا امام رضا، یہ آ رہی ہے مسلسل صدا امام رضا، امام رضا امام رضا امام رضا امام رضا صلوات اللهم صل
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. فاتحة. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. خوشنودی مولا رضا بلندتر صلوات. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. یہ چوکٹ چوم کر کی ہے دعا ہر بار مشہد میں. یہ چوکٹ چوم کر کی ہے دعا ہر بار مشہد میں. الہی ٹھہر جائے وقت کی رفتار مشہد میں. یہ چوکٹ چوم کر کی ہے دعا ہر بار مشہد میں. جنازے تو بہت آتے ہوئے دیکھے مگر میں نے جنازے تو بہت آتے ہوئے دیکھے مگر میں نے نہیں دیکھے کہیں بھی موت کے آثار مشہد میں. سنا ہے خود شفا دینے کو آتے ہیں وہاں مولا. سنا ہے خود شفا دینے کو آتے ہیں وہاں مولا. سو اب خود جا کے میں ہو جاؤں گا بیمار مشہد میں. رضا کے حسن پر یوسف کو بکتے دیکھتی دنیا. رضا کے حسن پر یوسف کو بکتے دیکھتی دنیا. اگر ہوتا کہیں بھی مصر کا بازار مشہد میں. سنا کر منقبت مولا کی میں ان سے دعا لوں گا. سنا کر منقبت مولا کی میں ان سے دعا لوں گا. ملیں گے جب کبھی بھی می سمے تمار مشہد میں. الہی ٹھہر جائے वक्त की रफ्तार मशहद में ये चौकट चूम कर की है दुआ हर बार मशहद में सलावत अल्लाहुम्मा सल्लि अला मुहम्मद व आले मुहम्मद
العلي العظيم حسبنا الله ونعم الوكيل ونعم المولى ونعم النصير والصلاة والسلام والتحية والإكرام على الرسول المسدد المصطفى الأمجد المحمود الأحمد الذي سمي في السماء بأحمد وفي الأرض بأبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين المنتجبين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا اللهم صل وقل رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي أما بعد قال الله تبارك وتعالى في كتابه الكريم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل لا أسألكم عليه أجرا إلا المودة في القربى صدق الله العلي العظيم زينوا مجالسكم بالصلوات على محمد وآل محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. My respected elders, brothers and sisters in Iman here in Florida or across the globe, wherever you're hearing my voice, Salamun alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Question, what is wisdom? Keep that question in the back of your mind, inshallah, we will return to it. We're told there's a moment in time where Ma'mun al-Abbasi is sitting in his court. When he's sitting in his court, he has just ascended to the throne. When he's sitting on the throne, he begins to have a conversation with his wazirs, his advisors. And he says to them, I have now ascended to the throne. His father had just died. Harun al-Abbasi had just died. He said, I have now ascended to the throne. I have a question for you. He said, what's the question? The wazirs are there to advise and answer the questions. He said, who is a threat to my rule? Who is a threat to my dominion? Who is a threat to me ruling over this place and this empire? The wazirs came back and they responded. They said, there's a few individuals who may be a threat to you. He said, who? He said, number one is a wazir of yours, another one, not one of us, but another one who's an advisor, who's very intelligent, and he knows how to play this game, and he can take your place. He said, very well. Who else? He says, second and perhaps the most likely candidate is your own brother Amin. Your father's son, Amin, your brother. He is most likely to be a threat to you. He said, don't worry about him, I'll take care of him. He said, who else? He said, there's one other person, the wazir's advised. He said, who? His name is Ali. Ali who? Ali ibn Musa, al-Raza. He said, who's that? What's his deal? He says, he is the Imam of the Shia. So where is he? He's in Medina. He said, what threat does he pose? He said, does he have wealth? Does he have the property? Does he have a dominion? Does he have an empire? What does he have? No, he has none of that. So what does he have? He has the love of the people in his hearts. The people store his love in their hearts. He says, well, how is that? Anyone who sees him, who witnesses, who spends time with him, is attracted to him. He said, well, very well. Bring him here. This is the Imam who you and I are here to commemorate his Wiladat, Imam Ali ibn Musa al-Raza. An Imam who has made an immense contribution not only to Shiaism, not only to Islam, but to the world. And you may ask why, and inshallah we'll come to that. But this is that Imam who is known as Alim Ali Muhammad, that is, the scholar of the holy household. A household in which there is Ja'far al-Sadiq, a household in which there is Imam Zainul Abidin, a household in which there are all of Baqir, there are the likes of Baqir al-Ulum, there's the likes of Ja'far al-Sadiq, there is Ali ibn Abi Talib who is Bab-e Madinatul Ilm. In that household, the alim is this Imam. Why? Because this is that Imam who made the knowledge of the Ahlul Bayt known not only on a local level, no, not only on a national level, but on a global level. You may ask how that is. You see, and what we will see in a moment, is how Islam began to spread and the connections that were global began to be formed during this time, in this period, in this era. And it was the Imam who was at the forefront of making sure that if there was anyone who was telling the right message of Islam, it was Imam Raza alayhi salam, this particular Imam. Therefore, we owe him a tremendous debt of gratitude to this beloved Imam. Number one. But what I want to look at in this can understand and I can understand what was that circumstance, number one. Number two, how does that circumstance relate to you and I in the 21st century, in the modern age, in the modern world? You will find that the circumstances then are very similar to the circumstances now. And you will find that the principles that were there are still the same as the principles that were now, or the lack thereof, I should say. And this is why it's very important for us as followers of the Ahlul Bayt to be able to see things in a multi-dimensional fashion, as opposed to singular, number one. Number two. Number three, how did the Imam alayhi salam make his knowledge known? Rather, I should say no. How did he make his wisdom known? What's the difference between knowledge and wisdom? And why is wisdom something that takes things to another level? And that is what you and I should strive for. Then I want to look at the fourth level, what are those things that the Imam helped us solve those problems at that time and today? How is the Imam helping you and I? And what is it that can help alleviate some of the greatest challenges and problems that we are facing today in our lives through the wasila and the tawassul of Imam Raza alayhi salam? This is our brief conversation for this evening. Wherever you are, here in Florida or across the globe, wherever you're hearing my voice, from the bottom of your heart, send a salawat on Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. When we come to the eighth holy Imam, we must understand what was that circumstance in that environment in which the Imam alayhi salam existed and lived. You see, at that point in time, you have to go to the time of Mansur. Mansur was the first Abbasid Khalifa. Mansur is the one who established Baghdad as the capital of the Abbasid rule. When he established Baghdad as the capital of the Abbasid rule, as you've known from past lectures that we've had as well, Baghdad's walls were built with the blood of the Sadat and the Shi'as at large. There was a tremendous amount of animosity that took place. In order that the walls of Baghdad were built and the city was lined by draining the blood of Sadat into the cement as opposed to water. It was a bloodbath, to the point that many of them would be buried alive in the middle of the walls. This was the circumstance thereof. After Mansur came his son Harun al-Abbasi. Many people call him Harun Rashid. Of course, we don't accept that, because Rashid meaning rightly guided. If you were to translate Harun al-Rashid in English, it would be Aaron the rightly guided. Of course, we don't accept him to be rightly guided. Therefore, he is Aaron the Abbasi one. After his death, he is the one who patronized many of the arts and sciences. After him came his son Ma'mun. Now, why is this important? This is very important for you and I to understand, is if you go outside of these walls, meaning outside of the mosque walls, and you talk to people who are not Muslims, and you go to the universities or you go to the popular opinion books, they say there was a period which was called the Golden Age, 300 years from 800 AD to 1100 AD. This was the period known as the Golden Age of Islam. This is where many of the mathematics, the physics, the sciences, the astronomies, and many of the arts came from this period. The very famous, renowned philosopher Bertrand Russell, I'm sure you must have heard of the name. Bertrand Russell, he says, we typically say that from 600 AD to 1000, this is what is known as the Dark Ages. But Bertrand Russell says this is not entirely true. Because at that time, China had the Tang dynasty, which was one of the biggest flourishers of arts. And at the same time, the Muslim empires were flourishing. So when we say that it's the Dark Ages, according to Bertrand Russell, he says this is the Dark Ages from the Euro-Christian perspective. It's not because, and he says this is what we believe to be the only civilization. But from the worldly perspective, it was not the Dark Ages. China was flourishing, the Muslim empire was flourishing during this time. But what was going on there? You saw, for example, during this time, the works of Muhammad al-Khawarizmi, Kitab al-Jabr wal-Maqabil was written. The first book on algebra as we know it was written during this period. For example, you have the likes of, during this time, you had al-Jahiz, who was a writer at this time. You also had the likes of the Muqaddimah of Ibn Khaldun. I remember Mark Zuckerberg, he recommended, the founder of Facebook, he recommended certain books to his company and staff. And one of the books that he recommended was the book called Al-Muqaddimah by Ibn Khaldun. Now, why is the founder of Facebook recommending his staff to read this book? He says, although the methodologies of many of the things that are mentioned here are not true any longer and they've been proven false, he says the important thing here is the methodology. The elements and the details have sometimes been proven wrong, but the way that he was thinking is very important for you and I to recognize. And Ibn Khaldun also contributed during this time as well. And you had many other people who were contributing during this time. As you know, algorithm, the word that runs our modern world, for example, if you go to Google, Google runs an algorithm, Facebook runs an algorithm, Instagram runs an algorithm, a repeating computer software, or a repeating process. The word algorithm is a direct Latinization of al-Khawarizmi. Khawarizmi into Latin becomes algorithm. Don't ask me how that happened, but that's what happened. Now, Khawarizmi was the one who wrote Kitab al-Jabr wal-Maqabil, which was the first book on applied mathematics. Now, you may say here, this is fantastic, what a great period, what a great element, but I want to keep something in mind. Note and mark the difference between knowledge and wisdom. You see, if someone asks, and this really ties in with what we mentioned last time about truly educated, what is true knowledge? I'll give you an example. Bear with me on this as I race the clock very quickly. You come to me and say that Umar II was the worst person who ever lived on this planet. Umar II is who? Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, the Umayyad ruler. And you say he's the worst person who ever lived. I say, hold on a second. Umar ibn Abdul Aziz or Umar II is the one who gave Fadak back to the Ahlul Bayt. See, sometimes people hear this and they say, oh, he was the best Umayyad ruler. He's the best person in the world. We should pray for him. Hold on a second. He still didn't give the right back to the Ahlul Bayt, and he sat in the position where the Ahlul Bayt were supposed to be. Do we have that level of seeing things in a multi-dimensional fashion? To be able to say that yes, maybe one thing this individual did was good, or two things, or three things, or whatever that element of what they did was good, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that person in totality is good, or totality is bad. You see, this will help many of our issues that we face in foreign policy, local policy, domestic policy. We sometimes paint people with broad brushes and say this person is all good or all bad. You see, this is the first element of the equation. Now, when we come back to the likes of Ma'mun, Harun, Mansur, this is something that's very important for our world. Yes, knowledge was flourishing during that time from the sciences and the arts. But I want to help you understand what was going on there and also understand what's going on here. Sciences were flourishing, arts were flourishing. That does not necessarily mean that ethics and morality were flourishing. There's a difference. If I come to our modern world, there are some countries in the Far East that are the biggest countries in the world that have developed tremendously economically and pulled 70 million, hundreds of millions of people out of abject poverty. But they still commit atrocities against Muslim minorities. Who's there to speak out? Or for example, if you come to our modern world, there was tremendous development in the 20th century in terms of physics to the point that we were able to establish nuclear energy. We were able to use it to create atomic energy, which was science, but it led to the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Was that wisdom? That people are still suffering till this day because of that travesty? You see, knowledge is one thing. Flourishing in sciences is one thing. It's all good at some level. However, you need ethics and morality and wisdom to control that. That's where the Ahlul Bayt come in, the principles and the ethics. What happened when Ma'mun is having this conversation with his henchmen? He says that bring Ali ibn Musa here. Bring Ali ibn Musa to this part of Tus, ultimately in modern day Persia, Marv and the likes. At that point in time, when they sent, he said, look, you told me that he is that person who anyone who sees him, they get attracted to him. So make sure you bring him in secrecy. Cover him, hide him, make sure that people aren't interacting with him, otherwise they'll all be attracted on his way here. You see, at that point in time, they were at one level patronizing the arts and sciences and those were flourishing, but at the same time, they were undermining the Ahlul Bayt. And he's still the person who poisoned the Ahlul Bayt. Imam Raza in particular. So in our modern world, we may use very advanced mathematics and sciences and the likes, but if we're using that to harm justice, that's still a problem. That's a lesson that we learned from that time that is very applicable still to this day. So what happened? When Imam alayhi salam, he gets there finally, when he gets there, at that point in time, he says, I want to make you my wali al-ahad. I want you to make my crown prince. Make you my heir apparent is the proper term. So that means if anything happens to me, you're the ruler. It was a political ploy. At that point in time, the Imam knew the circumstance and saw the circumstance and he said, look, you are making me the person who's responsible after you. You are making me responsible for making judgments, but know this, I will make no judgment. You're putting me in that capacity, but I will not make any verdicts. So imagine you take a judge, you appoint them as a judge, but the judge themselves says, I'm not going to make any decrees. I'm not going to make any judgments. What's the point there? The Imam is using his wisdom. He said, look, I'm not going to be like any of the other people who you can pay and use my position in order that I can establish your validity as a ruler. It's not going to happen. The first level of wisdom of the Imam, the first apparent level of wisdom that we can understand. The Imam did not let himself be used by the rulers. Now, keeping that in mind, as we progress further, the Imam was that individual who was there and present. But what is the lesson that we learn here? You see, there were certain debates that took place during the time of the Imam in the court of the Abbasid rulers. Why is this important? You see, the Abbasids had made connections with the Christian world at that time. For example, who? For example, Charlemagne. Charlemagne was a very famous ruler of the Franks. And the Muslim world was advanced compared to the Christian world at that time. In fact, according to historians, around 799, there was gifts that were sent from the Abbasids towards Charlemagne. In fact, one of the things that is mentioned is a water clock, where Charlemagne himself, when he was looking at this, he was astonished. How did they make this? And he thought it was some type of sorcery. But what's very important here is when Ma'mun used to call on these very, very intelligent people from all over the world, he used to also try to undermine the position of Imam Raza. So when he would try to undermine the position of Imam Raza, do you know what he would do? He would say, oh, Imam Raza, oh, we have this gathering by chance of these people who want to debate and discuss things. Now, this is something that's very important. Those people who were sitting there in the court were not just scholars. Many of them were people who were debaters, rhetoricians. For example, there was a debate that happened early in philosophy between Aristotle and others. These people came forward and said, the sophists and Aristotle. Sophists were the lawyers of the ancient Greco-Roman period. They said, look, there's nothing such as truth. Truth is only what you can prove. Aristotle said, no, hold on. There is actual inherent truth. And we have to get to the bottom of it. And they were at odds. Similarly, the people who were there to debate the Imam were not there to say that what is truth, like an alim. They were there simply to twist and play and try to prove themselves right and prove the other party wrong. So when the news came out that this debate is going to ensue, one of the debates, what happened? At that point in time, when this occurred, one of the followers of the Shia of the Ahlul Bayt, he came to Imam Raza. He said, Yabna Rasulullah, Ma'mun has prepared a debate and he wants you to come and he wants to ambush you and he's going to ask you questions and I'm afraid. He said, what are you worried about? He said, I'm worried that these are not scholars. These are not intellectuals that if you say something to them and they'll accept what you say. They won't do that. These are people who are debaters, who are rhetoricians, who are people who know how to play with words and people's logic. And they can make people seem like they don't know what they're talking about. I'm afraid, I don't have a doubt in your knowledge. I'm just afraid of the perception. He said, look, you have nothing to worry about. We've been divinely inspired with knowledge. Remember, if you remember what Imam As-Sadiq alayhi salam in the last lecture we talked about, knowledge is a light which Allah illuminates in the heart. Reading is one level, learning is one level, and it's very important. But true knowledge, as per the Ahlul Bayt, is the one that illuminates the heart. So when the Imam alayhi salam got there, as I proceed forward, he found that there were Christians, Jews, Zoroastrians, people from all different faiths that were gathered there. This is what I mean, Alim Ali Muhammad, who brought the knowledge apparent at a global level. People not only from all the different religions, people from different parts of the world. He says, look, the Abbasid ruler says, look, Ya ibn Rasulullah, this happens to be a gathering. They want to discuss things, or would you accept some questions? He says, very well. He said, what questions? At some point in time, they began to have a conversation with the Christians and the Jews and the other faiths. At that point in time, when the discussion ensued, it came on the issue of Nabi Isa alayhi salam. At that point in time, Imam Raza alayhi salam begins to have a conversation with the Christian community. And he says, look, you are the rulers and the leaders of the Christian community. You see, Nabi Isa was someone who didn't fast the most and he didn't pray the most. He said, how can you say that? The Christian said, there was no one who prayed more. There's no one who fasted more. There's no one who spent more time in worship than Isa ibn Maryam. Really? And you claim he's God? He said, yes. So, well, if he's God, then who was he praying to? And who was he fasting for? It was a moment of reflection for them. Because if you remember, in terms of Catholicism and the Trinity, it was a compromise that took place during the period of Constantine. Because Constantine wanted to unite his empire under one rule. The Imam answered them and they were flabbergasted. They didn't have a response at that point in time. He said, then it came to the issue of the Jewish community at that point in time. The question ensued, according to the debate. And you can find this in Ayun Akhbar al-Raza and many other books. And you will find at that point in time, the conversation ensued that why is it that you believe in Musa or Moses, but you don't believe in the prophets afterwards? They said, well, the miracles, the mu'jizat, the karamat of Moses are well known and well established. Oh, what are they? For example, the 10 Commandments. For example, the staff. For example, Yad-e Bayzan, the light that used to come from his palm. Very well. But what about the other prophets? At that point in time, it was a moment of reflection. It said, Isa brought the dead back to life. By the way, it's a long debate. I don't have time to cover the entire debate, just glimpses of it. At that point in time, they said that Isa, the Christians said, Isa brought the dead back to life. But the Imam further responded, but Hizkiel also brought the dead back to life. Ezekiel, as we say in English. And there's other people who brought the dead back to life. Are they also God? They didn't have a response. Going back to this, when it came back to the Jewish community, the questions that ensued, the Imam said, but what about Isa? Isa brought the dead back to life. It's established. There's the Christian community sitting right next to you. To them it's established. To the Muslim community, the Prophet brought the Quran. The Prophet split the moon. The Prophet did miracle after miracle, whether it was the clouds and others. Why do you not accept? They didn't have responses. And then Imam went down the line. He also, by the way, very interestingly, debated atheists at that time. You see, atheists at that time, surprisingly, were more sophisticated than many atheists even today, because of the philosophical arguments. For those who are interested, inshallah, I recommend you highly check out and read the debates of Imam Raza alayhi salam with atheists, and what istidlal and what proof the Imam alayhi salam gave to them that they accepted. Inshallah, for another time. Send a salawat on Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma sallam. But here's where I wanted to mention the wisdom. You see, as the knowledge was, the science and the arts and things were spreading, the moral compass of ethics and morality remained with the Imam. The Imam was the one who was coming forward and said, you cannot compromise principle. And he was explaining that to the world. Whether that was by undoing the arguments of Ma'mun and the Abbasids, or whether that was the knowledge that the Imam was spreading. So how was the Imam spreading Islam? The way he was spreading it was through, for example, there are several ways, but also the akhlaq. For example, a man came to the Imam to ask for some wealth, for some income, from some money. He didn't have any money. Look at the akhlaq, and a lesson for you and I today. When the man, and I'm condensing because it's a longer riwayah, he asked for some income from the Imam. The Imam said, hold on a moment. He went out. He went into the side room. When he went to the side room, he got some money. When he got some money, the Imam didn't hand it to the man straight away. Do you know what he did? He had a curtain there, and he stood behind the curtain and he put his hand out so that the man would not see his face, and then he extended the wealth there. The man took it and left. They said, Yabna Rasulullah, the companions that were there, why did you do that? Look at the akhlaq of the Ahlul Bayt. Look at the ethics, the morality, the integrity. He said, when he came and asked me for money, for income, he didn't have it. I went and got it. But when he came and asked, he asked to my face. He let me see him. And in that process, I saw the anxiety on his face of asking me. He put his integrity and his ego on the line to ask me. I didn't want him to look at my face again and see at that point in time as I had done him a favor. I didn't want him to feel that burden. Do we feel that way? Do we operate that way when we help others? Or are we doing help? Are we extending help in a way? First of all, are we extending help, number one? And if we are extending help, are we doing it in line with how the Ahlul Bayt did? Do you know how detailed the riwayat are with respect to helping and giving and taking care of others and looking after others? Imam Hassan leaves i'tiqaf. He's in the middle of i'tiqaf according to a riwayat that I mentioned to you before. I'tiqaf, you sit in the masjid the whole time. Someone asked him for help. He said, I don't immediately have what you need. He said, Yabna Rasulullah, because he had a debt. The man had a debt. When he had a debt, he said, Yabna Rasulullah, maybe you can talk to the person, and because of your word, he will delay me having to pay him back. He's called in his loan right away. Imam Hassan al-Mujtaba, he gets up from i'tiqaf, goes towards to get his slippers to leave. They say, Yabna Rasulullah, you're in i'tiqaf, you're going to leave? He said, I have heard from my father who heard from my grandfather that there is nothing that is better than helping a mu'min in need. What are the akhlaq? What are the ethics? The Imams established that. But now I want to come with something very important. You see, there are certain things that happen in our lives that sometimes we don't know why. Even I come from a mathematics background, some of you have also studied. There's a domain in philosophy and mathematics called heuristics. Heuristics in psychology means one thing, in philosophy means one thing, but also in mathematics, for example, there are some things that are theoretical proofs. There are some things that we know through brute force, in computer science as well. There are things that we know just through brute force. For example, you run a program in a statistical software system, and we don't know the answer, but probabilistically this is what the answer is. Monte Carlo simulations and other things. I'm saying this for our next generation, people who study this at university. We don't necessarily have theoretical frameworks, but because of it happening over and over and over and again and getting these results, we therefore come forward and say, this is most probably the answer. There are also computer theoretical arguments that we don't have the physical system right now, but in the future we may at some time. Why am I saying this? You see, there are karamat and mu'jazat, and I believe this in my heart of hearts. Having studied for years in the academic system, many of you have. But when I go to Karbala, when I go to the ziyarat of the Imams, there is a power there that I can't describe to you. I don't have the words today. But that doesn't mean that in 5, 10, 15, 20, maybe 100 years, we won't have the answer to these things. So don't rule that out. You see, I've given this example numerous times. People's health, people's lack of having children. Some of the biggest problems that people have had in their lives have been solved through these individuals and these personalities. You may ask where, you may ask when. Not very long ago, in Iran, there was a very famous Noha reciter. This is a very well-documented event. A very famous Noha reciter, he would come for the ziyarat and mashhad of Imam Raza alayhi salam. When he would come to the ziyarah of Imam Raza, he would sometimes give a gift to the Imam. Sometimes money, sometimes something else. Sometimes he'd bring 1,000 toman, 2,000 toman, whatever he had. One time he came to visit the shrine of Imam Raza alayhi salam, and he brought with him 20,000 toman as a gift that he wanted to give as a gift to the Imam's shrine. When he gets there, he does his ziyarah, he brings the wealth and the income with him, and he leaves it there with the custodian or the individual. He says, look, as he was leaving, he's leaving the shrine, he bumps into an elderly lady. Physically, actually it's a very crowded space, the shrine of Imam Raza alayhi salam. He bumps into this lady, he apologizes, she gets hurt. He apologizes, I'm so sorry, I wasn't able to protect myself, I wasn't able to stop, I'm sorry I bumped into you, I apologize. She said, it's okay, don't worry. He said, I felt bad. I still didn't feel okay. He said, I had a thought that came in my mind. I said, why not this income that I brought as a gift to the Imam? I always come, inshallah, I'll come again, I'll bring more for the Imam. But this gift that I brought, this 20,000 toman, I'll give to her. He said, it's the least I can do. I bumped into her, I heard her, she's old, she's elderly. He said, I went back and I retrieved the 20,000 toman. And I came back to this elderly lady and I said, oh lady, I harmed you, I hurt you, I really apologize. Here's something I would like to give you. She said, what's this? It's just some income, it's just some money, it's about 20,000 toman. I brought it from Imam Raza, but I come for the ziyarah of Imam Raza. Inshallah, I'll come back again and I'll bring more. But this I wanted to give you, because you are a visitor, a zair of the shrine of Imam Raza. And I've hurt you. It's the least I can do, please accept it. She said, this is not necessary. She said, no, take it. So what did you say this was? She says, it was some money. How much money? 20 what? 20,000. What? Toman. She began to cry in a way she's never cried. He said, what happened? What's wrong? Is it not enough? What's wrong? What's the problem? He said, no. He said, you don't know why I came here, the elderly lady said to this reciter. He said, why? What? My son is getting married, and our finances have been very tight. I came to the Imam to ask him to help us financially. But that's not the thing. I know he would help. I just didn't know how. So the exact deficit, the exact amount that I needed was 20,000 toman. I'm crying because of how much the Imam looks after us. Ayatollah Bahjat, may Allah elevate his soul, his son narrates, Ayatollah Bahjat's son. He said Ayatollah Bahjat had a friend, a colleague of his who was in the Hawza. Ayatollah Fahri. Ayatollah Fahri was a colleague, and he is very old. He also passed away in the 2000s. Ayatollah Bahjat, of course, passed in the 2000s. Ayatollah Bahjat's son says, I heard this conversation from my father and his friend. He said, what happened? He said, Ayatollah Fahri, my father's friend and colleague from a young age, he came to visit my father, Ayatollah Bahjat, when they were old. And they were towards their final years. Ayatollah Fahri said, oh Agha Bahjat, you and I have been friends for many years. We've been very close for many years. But I want to complain to you and I want to say something to you today. He said, what is it? He said, you did not fulfill your responsibility as a friend to me. Ayatollah Bahjat, a spiritual scholar, he's dedicated his whole life to akhlaq and ethics and looking after the rights of people. He's saying, I didn't do my right to you? He said, no. Ayatollah Fahri said, no, you didn't. He said, why? How? he said, you elevated, Ayatul Fahri says to Ayatul Bahjat, you elevated to very high heights spiritually. But you didn't take me with you. You didn't take me with you. A friend takes their friend with them. He said, very well. He said, what do you want? He said, I want you to tell me one of the secrets that you know from the Ahlul Bayt that helped you get to this status, that helped you get to this level. He said, very well. He said, I will tell you one thing, and the only reason I'm saying this is because you are saying that I've spent my whole life with you and I did not do what a friend should do for a friend. He said, very well. He said, one time I went to the shrine of Imam Raza alayhi salam in Mashhad. And when I went to the shrine of the Imam, he told me 10 things, of which I will only tell you one. I cannot tell you others. He said, what is it? He said, the Imam told me, according to Ayatul Bahjat, he's saying to Ayatul Fahri, he says, look, the Imam told me that of the 10 points, he said, 1 point, anyone who calls on us, the Ahlul Bayt, and asks for shelter, we will not deny them shelter. Now, what does shelter mean? That's another conversation for another day. It could mean housing, it could mean protection in every environment. But remember this, and this is what I wanted to get to as we draw to a conclusion. The chain of the golden chain of the hadith, that when the Imam is in Nishapur, he is coming towards Tus and Khurasan. When he's in Nishapur, 35,000 historians gather and they have their pens and paper ready and they are wanting to see the Imam. And they say, Yabna Rasulullah, tell us something so we may write it down. And the Imam says, the very famous chain, the golden chain, the hadith silsilatul zahab. He says, I heard from my father who heard from his father all the way down to Rasulullah. That kalimatu la ilaha illallah hisni. That the kalima of la ilaha, to say la ilaha illallah is a fort. And whoever gets into the fort, amina min adabi. Whoever is dakhil into the fort, who comes into the fort of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is protected from the adab. And then people said, that's it, that's all you have to say? And then the Imam, who had gone back into his entourage and he had gone away, he stopped. And he told them to stop the camel, and he looked out and he said, وَلَكِنْ بِشَرْطِهَا وَشُرُوتِهَا. There are conditions. And we and I, the Ahlul Bayt, are amongst those conditions. But here's what I wanted to mention to you. Ayatullah Agha Sheikh Ali, as well as other scholars have said, according to the riwayat, in your most dire moment, take the hadith of Silsilatul Zahab, write it on paper with saffron, and put it into water, and drink it, or give it to the person who's ill. The riwayat say astonishing things, which inshallah, God willing, but that's the solution to many of the problems that you and I are facing. Now the question remains, why is it that these karamat, these mu'ajizat, these connections, you and I struggle to have oftentimes? Because the world and environment that we live in is totally material. That doesn't just mean the luxury items. That means everything has to be something that I see and I can touch only. And because of that, we can't believe these things. But ask those people who I know in my travels, in majalis, who say they weren't having children for years. One trip to Karbala, one trip to Mashhad, one trip to Qom. It changed their dynamics of their life. These are, by the way, not people who are lay people. Some of these are scientists, some of these are engineers. You'll remember the event I said of in Paris that was on the website of the Maraja. Of people who had the impossible happen. Do we know why? Can we explain today? Perhaps not today, but there will be a time where we're able to explain it, inshallah. As I draw to a conclusion, inshallah, in the final moments, know this. Sheikh Bahai was the individual who helped to design the shrine of Imam Raza in Mashhad about 400 years ago. He said, he told the constructors, I have a ta'weez that I've written, I want you to put it over the door. He came back after some days, he said, have you put the ta'weez on the door that I asked you to put on the door? He said, no. He said, why? He said, I saw the Imam in my dream. He said, don't put that ta'weez. I saw it once, I said, maybe it's a dream. This dream is not hujjah. He said, I saw another night. Imam said, don't put it. Third time, fourth time, I said, this cannot be a coincidence. Sheikh Bahai began to cry. He said, why? He said, do you know what I wrote there? I wrote in that ta'weez, let no one who is a sinner come into this place. The Imam said to him in the dream, he said that this ta'weez limits who's allowed to come here. I didn't limit the person who's allowed to come here. This is that household that opens the door to hur. Who are you and I? The poet says, Dono jahan ki mangta ni'mat Hussain se, kam zarf mangta raha bayat Hussain se. Kam zarf mangta raha bayat Hussain se, اور آیا تھا سب سے دیر میں لیکن کمال ہے. آیا تھا سب سے دیر میں لیکن کمال ہے, حر سب سے پہلے لے گیا جنت حسین سے. آیا تھا سب سے دیر میں لیکن کمال ہے, حر سب سے پہلے لے گیا جنت حسین سے. درود بھیجے محمد والے محمد پر. جب بھی میں قم گیا مشہد کی فضا سے پہلے, جب بھی میں قم گیا مشہد کی فضا سے پہلے, یوں لگا شام گیا کرب و بلا سے پہلے. یوں لگا شام گیا کرب و بلا سے پہلے. You see, these are the nights of Bibi Ma'asuma as well as Imam Raza alayhi salam. We commemorated Bibi Ma'asuma just a few days ago. These brother and sister are just like the brother and sister of Karbala and Sham, Bibi Zainab Imam Hussain alayhi salam. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless this holy gathering. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us to learn from the ma'rifah Imam Raza alayhi salam and allow us to encapsulate his wisdom as well as knowledge in our lives. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us to be good examples for Shiaism, for Islam at large in this part of the world and wherever we may be. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to cure all those who are ill across the globe, especially from COVID or any illness, Ya Allah. By Imam Musa ibn Ja'far, Ali ibn Musa Raza, Ya Allah, grant them shifa in this night. Anyone who has a financial difficulty, Ya Allah, by Imam Ali ibn Musa Raza, grant them sustenance in this night. And Ya Allah, hasten the reappearance of our Imam and allow us to be amongst his companions when he returns. Wa akhir da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد السلام عليك يا رسول الله السلام عليك يا نبي الله السلام عليك يا أمير المؤمنين السلام عليك يا فاطمة الزهراء سيدة النساء العالمين السلام عليك يا حسن المجتبى السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله السلام عليك يا ابن رسول الله السلام عليك يا ابن سيد الوصين السلام عليك يا ابن فاطمة الزهراء سيدة النساء العالمين السلام عليك على جدك وأبيك السلام عليك على أمك وأخيك السلام عليك على 9 معصومين من ذريتك وبنيك السلام عليك على جميع المستشهدين بين يديك ورحمة الله وبركاته السلام عليك يا غريب الغرباء السلام عليك يا معين الضعفاء والفقراء السلام عليك يا مغيث الشيعة والزوار في يوم الجزاء السلام عليك يا أنيس النفوس السلام عليك أيها المدفون بأرض طوس السلام عليك يا علي بن موسى الرضا والتحية المجد والثناء. السلام عليك وعلى آبائك السبعة وأبنائك الأربعة. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا صاحب العصر والزمان. الأمان 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 من فتن الزمان. السلام عليك يا خليفة الرحمن. السلام عليك يا إمام الإنس والجان. السلام عليك يا مظهر الإيمان. السلام عليك يا شريك القرآن. السلام عليك يا قاطع البرهان. السلام عليك يا إمام زماننا هذا. عجل الله تعالى فرجك وسهل الله مخرجك وظهورك. السلام عليك ورحمة الله وبركاته. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم كن لوليك الحجة ابن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك طوعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. وصلى الله على محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين. ورحم الله من يقرأ سورة الفاتحة مع الصلوات والإخلاص.